Welcome to the intersection of city politics and everyday life. I'm Brian Lehrer. Did you know that restaurant servers, bartenders, and other tipped workers, including nail salon workers and car washers, don't fall under the $13 an hour New York State minimum wage? They receive a lower minimum, $8.65. In some workplaces, tips easily make up the difference, and sometimes more, but not always, not everywhere. Labor organizer Saru Jayaraman, the national director of the Restaurant Opportunity Centers, argues that the 4 million or so tipped workers nationwide all need the full minimum wage, sometimes to lift them out of poverty. This is from a New York TED Talk.
And who are these tipped workers? Are they guys who work in fancy steakhouses taking home $18 an hour in tips? In fact, 70% of tipped workers in America are women. They work at restaurants like the IHOP and Applebee's and Olive Garden. They make a median wage of $8 an hour, including tips. They suffer from 3 times the poverty rate of the rest of the U.S. workforce, and they use food stamps at double the rate of the rest of the U.S. workforce, which means the women who put food on our tables in America cannot actually afford to feed themselves.
Saru Jayaraman. Many restaurateurs in this city fear that paying the full minimum wage will, along with other factors, drive them out of business. Nonetheless, Governor Andrew Cuomo wants New York to join the 7 other states that have scrapped the sub-minimum wage. But before any changes to the wage rules, there will be more public hearings around the state. This tipping matter raises many questions, like how much does tipping encourage sexual harassment of waitstaff? Are no tipping restaurants practical? How to lift the wages of dishwashers, line cooks, and others who often don't share in tips. So we thought we'd have our own public hearing on all this right here, right now. To begin, joining us, Catherine Barnett, director of the local New York City chapter of the Restaurant Opportunity Centers. We just saw that clip of her national director. And Andrew Rigie is here. He's executive director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance, which represents the restaurant industry. Later, a Brooklyn restaurateur will join us with his story. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks
for having us.
And there are so many places that we could start, but let's start here because, Catherine, if nothing else, at this moment in our history, maybe there's an opportunity to really reduce sexual harassment in our society and sexual assault. So what is the relationship that you're arguing between sexual harassment and tips?
Well, what we see is that because tipped workers are dependent on the whims of customers to make up their minimum wage, to make up the base wage, they often find themselves being subjected to inappropriate comments, touching, and sexual harassment that happens not only from customers, but even sometimes from managers and co-workers. And what we've also seen is that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission reports every year that the highest number of sexual harassment cases being reported are coming from the restaurant industry. So,
and what, the women who are waitstaff put up with it because they feel it's that their tips are dependent on it?
When you have a lower minimum wage and you have to make up the difference to make up your wage with tips, oftentimes we know that women have put up with a lot of inappropriate behavior trying to make up their minimum wage.
So, Andrew, what about this from your perspective? This is a rising argument from the workers' side now.
Well, first, I think it's really important, Brian, to mention that if an employee's base wage and their tips don't equal or exceed the minimum wage, as they often do, and many times many multiples of that, the employer is required by law to make up the difference. So I think that's important to say because no one is working for less than the minimum wage. If they are, the employer is breaking the law, and by all means, the Department of Labor and attorneys should go after that bad employer. But they are required to pay the difference.
And I want to come back to that later and ask how realistic that is as a way to solve the problem. But on the sexual harassment question.
So on the sexual harassment question, when you actually look at the EEOC data, it actually showed that states like New York that have a tip credit actually had lower rates of reported sexual harassment than states like California that do not allow a tip credit.
Are you arguing that's related to the lower minimum wage tip credit?
I'm not making any argument. I'm just stating that that is the opposite of what your organization and others have been claiming, which is that states that have a tip credit have higher rates of sexual harassment, but the actual government data shows the opposite. So my question I'd always ask back to you and to others is, are you saying that there is a relationship between tipping and sexual harassment?
What we're saying is that we found that restaurant workers who are dependent on lower minimum wage and making up the difference with tips are subjected to higher rates of sexual harassment. And we've seen this. We've also seen, I'm not sure where you are getting your data from, but our information shows that in the states where there are one fair wage, where there is one fair wage already, meaning that restaurant workers are making the same minimum wage and then receiving tips on top of that, that the sexual harassment complaints are actually decreased.
So you have dueling statistics.
We have dueling statistics.
I want to stay on this aspect for a minute and play a clip from one of the public hearings. These are going on around the state between now and the end of June as the governor and others in Albany get information and testimony on whether or not, in fact, to do away with the tipped lower minimum wage. So there was one in Farmingdale, Long Island in Suffolk County, and here's a man named Andrew Reynolds speaking about this issue on behalf of the owners.
Now, when we talk about sexual harassment, New York City is just about to implement a law where they're going to require people to take a class to learn about sexual harassment. That's how you're going to help sexual harassment. People that are actors making millions of dollars get harassed. People that work in businesses making hundreds of millions of dollars get harassed. Teach people and try to help the situation. This is, whether they're tipped or not, everybody is dealing with the same problem. This is wage theft. This is not. Help us as a government to make sure people are doing the right thing out there. Then we won't have this big argument.
He says training is the answer to that. Even, you know, millionaire, famous Hollywood stars get sexually harassed, as we know from the news. What's your response?
Definitely training is an important component, but we also have to talk about attitude shifting. We also need to talk about creating systems or looking at systems that actually promote an environment where sexual harassment and inappropriate behavior is, if not ignored, then encouraged. So I think it's all part and parcel of what we all want for all of our workers, right? It would be a safe working environment where people are being respected and being compensated appropriately.
Did you want to make one more point briefly on this before we go on to the next aspect?
Yeah, there's no argument. There needs to be zero tolerance policies for sexual harassment or any inappropriate behavior in the workplace, period.
How does a restaurateur do that with respect to customers? That would take a lot of moxie or something, right? To throw out your customers or whatever, you're paying customers if they're abusing your wait staff?
Absolutely not. If someone's acting inappropriate to someone working in your restaurant, I think you actually have a legal requirement to get that person out of there and don't let them come back into the restaurant. These are your team. You need to protect them, and people cannot come into the restaurant and harass anyone. You get them out of there. And if it's an employee that's harassing another employee, well, then you need to, discipline, if not terminate that person.
You know how we told you before you came on the air to turn off your cell phones? It should go for the host too. All right, so here's another clip from that Long Island public hearing. This time it's a worker in a restaurant whose name I have. It's Rosalinda Ramirez, and she's going to raise the issue of poverty wages.
And especially single mothers, when you're a woman, you have to multiply your energy, your time, your heart, everything, because you cover in everything. And at least we should have like a minimum salary to feel a little safe, to feel like we can at least put the food on the table. I feel like when I come to the stores, it's not the same, me and my friend Maria, just because we have different positions. If I'm working under tips, I cannot buy the same grocery shopping. We are afraid to go to the store lately because the cost of living is so expensive in Long Island.
All right, she's worried about tips not making up the sub-minimum wage to the minimum wage, but let me show you how that guy we heard before, testifying on the side of the owners, Andrew Reynolds, addressed that at the hearing.
It seems to me like the government is failing to do their job. They need to go out after these people that aren't paying these people fairly and make sure these businesses are sued or whatever they have to do to make sure that they're paying these workers, because I work for companies as well as a lot of people behind me that are to the letter of the law and do pay people fair minimum wage. So, you know, we could sit here and argue, but the issue is this is wage theft over here, and that's the problem. You know, we need to fix wage theft.
So, Andrew, is it realistic to expect that his solution could work? That is, that there's strong enough government enforcement to make sure that those servers in restaurants who aren't getting enough tips to bring them up to the minimum wage are actually getting the extra compensation from the owners?
Yeah, well, Governor Cuomo recently put out a press release that the state recovered about $35 million in wages and returned them to workers in 2017. And he's allocated another $1 million or more to wage theft enforcement. So if the state needs more than that, by all means, I think we need to protect workers if employers are breaking the law. But it's also important to point out the fact that it's not just employers that may not be making up the difference. I've spoken with plaintiff attorneys that represent the workers, and they say there's other issues. It's not so much the tip wage, because most people are meeting or exceeding the minimum wage. It's failure to pay overtime and other issues, which they're all enforcing, both through the Department of Labor and through private lawsuits.
Catherine, does he have a solution?
I think that, of course, we always want to make sure that we are looking at all aspects to eradicate wage theft. However, many times, even employers who are trying to do the right thing, not all of them are, you know, we have different employers. Some are trying to do the right thing, some are not doing the right thing. But even those who are trying to do the right thing many times find themselves exposed to greater liability, even just trying to keep up with some of the regulations and some of the language around making sure that the minimum wage, when the full minimum wage needs to be paid, and when they should be paying the lower minimum wage. So part of it is that the system is confusing, certainly, but a big part that we need to return to and remember is that it's, you know, why should workers not be allowed to have the full minimum wage? You know, that's really fundamentally what we're asking for. That's fundamentally what we're discussing.
You get to answer that question.
That's fundamentally not a factual statement. Fundamentally, restaurant employees, all employees, are required by the law to earn the minimum wage. They're just earning it between their base wage and their tips. And again, if there was ever a shortfall, the employer is required to make up the difference. But what we see from reports that employees submitted, employees are making about $20 an hour in tips. We at the New York City Hospitality Alliance conducted a survey. It covered about 14,000 tipped workers in New York City restaurants that were making about $25 an hour. Many are making many more. And I think what needs to be interjected into the conversation is that if we are to just eliminate the tip credit, what happens? And I think that's where we need to start getting into why this is a complex issue, because most people that aren't in the weeds and don't understand the complexity of this issue just say, oh yeah, everyone should be paid the $15 or whatever it is. And if it was that easy, restaurant owners would do it. It's the fact that it's so challenging and it could jeopardize those small businesses, those jobs, and different opportunities is why they're pushing back against the elimination of the tip credit.
Catherine, do you get that small restaurateurs in the city seem to really be genuinely concerned about this? I know a few, you know, outside of this table who are political liberals. They rail against Trump, the whole thing, and they're like, I'm really afraid of this. That's not to say every restaurant, but I've heard it from a few people.
Well, certainly I think there are a lot of different opinions here. We have our own restaurant association of restaurant owners called RAISE, and those members are certainly in favor of being able to pay a fair and sustainable wage to their employees. And I think, we all want to have an industry that is doing well. We have seen examples of industry doing well in other states that are already paying one fair wage, such as California, that has a bigger restaurant industry, has workers being paid the base minimum wage and still earning tips. So I think that, of course, there's always fear of the unknown. And I agree with Andrew that, we will have conversations, and there will always have to be conversations about implementation. But I think that restaurant owners, I think people want to think about retention, employee retention, satisfaction, the people that you work with. How are you going to be able to maintain not just your establishment, but also your workforce? And I think that there are a lot of restaurant owners that are looking for answers, that have suggestions, that have ideas and opinions. And I think it's good for us to be in conversation and dialogue and not think that everything needs to be so oppositional. We're moving towards wanting to make our industry better for everyone.
So let's talk about some alternative models to this whole question of how high the minimum wage should be, plus tips. How about the no tipping model? Andrew, a few restaurants are experimenting with this. They're paying the workers minimum wage or more, and there's just no tips. And to some people this makes a lot of sense. Like, wait, if you think about almost every other job in the world, you don't get tips to do your job. You do your job and you get paid by your employer. And why should restaurants be any different? And maybe that's in everybody's interest. Is it, in your opinion?
So listen, restaurants are different. I think they each independently need to decide what works for their business model. With the no tipping model, that may work for some people, but what we've seen is a lot of those restaurants that moved to the no tipping model actually reverted back to a tipping model for a few reasons. One, they got a lot of pushback from their employees. I don't think the one fair wage term is a fair one, but that's a different story. But when they were getting paid just one straight wage and not earning tips, they were actually making less money than they were under the tipping system. So they went to their bosses and said, wait, I want to go back to tipping. The other issue was the customers didn't like it. They may say, oh yeah, I like the idea of this one fair wage. But when restaurants increase menu prices enough to cover all these expenses, guess what happens? People start spending less, they dine out less, and it changes their purchasing behavior.
You wouldn't want government to outlaw tips, that kind of thing.
Well, that's certainly not what our conversation's about.
And another one, and we don't have that much time, but another model is the surcharge model. So it makes it transparent to the customer that the menu price is maybe the same menu price that it is now, but on top of it we add an X% surcharge that's tips for the wait staff and the kitchen workers and everybody else. What do you think about that one?
Again, I think different restaurants are going to explore different models, and certainly in other locations there are restaurants that are doing that with some success. So I think, again, it's going to be up to different establishments to think about what makes sense for them.
Would that solve the tip minimum wage? Because on that model, you would go to the regular minimum wage.
Sure. So there's a few different ways. We're very supportive. We've been urging Mayor de Blasio to allow restaurants to use a clearly disclosed surcharge. In this case, a restaurant could eliminate tipping, add a 20% surcharge, and then pay people an hourly wage. If they do that, they would not be taking the tip credit, which I know would make certain people happy. So I think that that is a good model. Also, I just think it's also important really to go back to the issue of tipping and harassment. I really want to understand the issue that if there is a correlation between tipping and sexual harassment, how are you still advocating for tipping?
What we have seen, again, is that people who are making a lower minimum wage and depending on tips,
15 seconds left.
And depending on tips to make up the difference, find themselves feeling more subject to sexual harassment and feeling that they have to tolerate or put up with it.
But the government data shows the opposite.
Thank you both for coming in. This discussion will go on at least through June 27th when there's a public hearing on this in New York City at Hostos Community College in the Bronx, June 27th. Thank you both very much. And before we hear from one Brooklyn restaurateur who in fact supports the surcharge idea, we asked our producer, Shannon Ayala, to talk with some restaurant managers at pizza parlors as well as upscale eateries to get their reactions to the idea of raising tip workers to the regular minimum wage.
If the state put restaurant staff on the same minimum wage level as everyone else, but could still...
That would be great. That would be great. Also because that way the staff has a higher motivation to do their job in a better way. They have they come to work with more, okay, yeah, let's work, let's do this. And the service will be, no matter what, a good service because they already know they're going home with a certain amount of money plus whatever tip it is.
As a manager, I understand what the governor is proposing and wants to do. But as coming from a background as serving in bartending, it's a little... It's going to be a hard sell for a lot of people. I know if I was bartending and serving right now, I would sure as hell wouldn't want to go to a paycheck.
I think it's a good thing for the employees because in a certain way we can, life here in New York is very expensive. So I believe that they're going to make extra money, which is going to help them for sure. So now we really need to do a good budgeting in order to keep everything, under our budget and to be able to cover all the costs plus to make some profits.
The owners will not like that, but as a future owner, I can tell you that I just want to pay everybody as much as they need to get paid and not lower than that because I've been in that position.
An unscientific survey of restaurant managers in Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan. Joining us now, Brooklyn restaurateur Doug Crowell. He's owner of Buttermilk Channel, a neighborhood hang in Carroll Gardens, and French Louis in Boerum Hill. He's recently gone to meetings with other worried owners. Welcome.
Hi, Brian. Great to be here.
Tell us about your places a little bit more. What do you serve? Who's your customer base?
So we got two bistros, French Louis in Boerum Hill and Buttermilk Channel in Carroll Gardens. Buttermilk's been there for 10 years and French Louis's been there for 4.
What is Buttermilk Channel a reference to?
Well, Buttermilk Channel is the water in between Brooklyn and Governor's Island, which is nearby, a short walk down to the waterfront, and fortunately has a delicious sounding name.
Cool. How many people do you employ?
About 100 between the two restaurants.
Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And what do you think about the tip minimum wage going away and having to raise everybody up to the regular minimum wage?
I mean, I would always want to clarify that there is only one minimum wage that covers everyone. The tip credit, simply allows us to, have part of that wage be covered by the gratuities that the staff receives, which, more than lifts them above the minimum wage line, certainly.
Which means it doesn't come out of your pocket, it comes out of the customer's pocket directly without you as a middleman.
Right now, $8.65 an hour comes out of my pocket. It'll be $10 next year. So that's gone up significantly. That's been a big change.
So to the person who would say, oh, he just wants to keep as much of the profits as he can and let the workers take the risk, what would you reply?
It's interesting because everyone seems to know that restaurants operate on a slim profit margin. My customers will tell me that all the time. They know this is a tough business and we know profits are slim. It can be hard for people to hold that in their heads though when they see busy restaurants and a lot of money changing hands. I mean, the matter of the fact is, without the tip credit, we can't afford a tip system. So, if we do away with the tip credit, we're doing away with tipping in restaurants like mine. That's just the way it will be.
Do you like the idea, or was I right in hearing that you like the idea of a surcharge as a solution to this problem?
I mean, I support the ability, restaurants having the ability to figure out what works right for them. It seems that in Danny Meyer's restaurants, there was such a disparity between what, say, managers were making and what servers were making, what waiters were making, these tremendous incomes, and cooks were making these very low wages. So that worked for them. It may not work for other places. A surcharge could offer you a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to charge something that looks like a tip. It is maybe the same basic percentage as a tip, but you could, use it to pay both your front and back of house.
and then the customers would not pay a tip. I mean, maybe some would choose to anyway if they particularly like the server.
I mean, at a certain point, the tipping model just breaks. You're charging too much.
Yes.
You're paying too much to the employee.
Right.
Therefore, you're charging too much. You know, if you do away with the tip credit, you've got a $30 hamburger, and you really can't ask your customer to tip on top of a $30 hamburger.
What do you think about other countries? Have you traveled and been to restaurants elsewhere? I think in England, the convention is more like 10%, lower than here. Some countries you don't really tip at all, and it is baked in.
Yeah,
Have
sure.
you seen something that you think is better than the American model?
I can't say that I understand any model in another country well enough to support it. They seem happy. You go to France, they seem happy. I don't know how they do it.
Have you polled, formally or informally, your employees?
That's a voice that I hear missing so frequently in this discussion, is what do the employees want? You know, the sort of confusing fact about the tip credit is that without it, you do away with the tip credit, they get paid more from their employer. They get paid up to the minimum wage, but it seems that frequently they will end up making less money, you know, because tipped employees, it's a good way of making money. It tends to be a high rate of pay, and that's why employees are frequently afraid of doing away with the tip credit.
Which could be different in different kinds of restaurants. So if you have French bistros in Boerum Hill and Carroll Gardens, maybe your waitstaff tends to do pretty well on tips, and they like the ability to have that incentive or that opportunity. I don't want to put words in their mouth.
I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think so.
But maybe it's that.
I told there's a group of employees who have spoken, and that was up in Maine, where a voter referendum did away with the tip minimum wage, and there was this huge uprising, amazingly effective, of tipped employees who managed to reverse that decision.
They did actually reverse it.
They advocated lowering their actual paid rates because it got them their tips back.
Right. But at some other restaurants that might be lower end, maybe the government enforcement isn't good enough to make sure that they're really getting the full minimum wage if their tips are low and don't bring them up?
It might be. I can't really speak to that. I mean, as an employer, I could pay my employees whatever I want to this week. I can do all sorts of wacky things. I think it doesn't give the employees much credit because they really have a lot of tools to fight back. They have calculators. You know, they know they've made less than the minimum wage this week, and there's plenty of lawyers who are ready to help them get those stolen wages.
How would they prove that to you or another owner, by the way? If they're getting tipped in cash and they show a certain amount of cash and say, you know, I only got this much this week, how do you know that they didn't stash the rest in their pockets?
Well, the tips are overwhelmingly on credit cards these days, but it's all in the books now. You know, the days of wads of cash gratuities are mostly over. Everything is declared for them.
Right, and it tends to be on cards.
It tends to be on cards, yeah.
The whole business of owning a restaurant. Why did you want to go into this, and what do you like about it?
Oh, it's a beautiful business, you know. We get to make people's day. We get to be the most exciting part of people's day. We get to restore them. We get to host their celebrations. We watch their families grow up. We get to be a hub of the community, and also as a community of employees. For me, one of the most satisfying parts is growing this community of friends and neighbors, and also employees. Is
this the biggest governmental threat to your business right now, or are there other things that you would want to highlight?
Oh, there's so many to choose from. This particular intervention would be very drastic. I mean, we see the minimum wage is going up and up, you know, which for the most part is great. They were too low before, but to eliminate the tip credit would be a big challenge because there's a big question of whether or not customers will pay those higher prices.
Because this might be coming, what's your prediction as to what would actually happen to your restaurants if it's implemented?
I always got to really hope to have a plan B available to me. I really hope for that surcharge. I think that's a really positive legislative solution. Being able to offer something that is similar to a tip is clearly stated. You know, I think people are concerned that the surcharge will be hidden. You know, it is clearly stated. Let's say it's 18% or 20%. That can then be distributed as tipped can't to both front and back of house. Because with the elimination of the tip credit, you also have this additional problem of being forced to pay your tipped employees a higher amount, which makes it difficult to pay your back of house employees, your kitchen employees, a higher amount.
Well, good luck at your restaurants, and thank you for sharing some time with us.
Thanks so much.
And that's our program for today. We're here each week at this hour at the highly taxed and well-regulated intersection of city politics and everyday life. And I invite you to listen to my radio program weekdays at 10 a.m. on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow, what were those mysterious payments to Trump lawyer Michael Cohen after he paid Stormy Daniels? I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.